it!
Hey, what's up, guys? Here to talk to you about UFC 270, which features two title fights, one of which being for the heavyweight championship between Francis Ngannou versus interim champion Gane, and the next one being for the flyweight championship belt, which features Moreno versus Figueiredo. And so this is a big way for the UFC to start out 2022, especially after the momentous, amazing year that they had in 2021. 2021 was a great year for the UFC. It seemed like every single week there's another great fight or an interesting matchup to watch, whether it's for a pay-per-view event or for one of their fight night events. So let's go ahead and dive right on into it. With this co-main event trilogy fight between Figueiredo and Moreno, this one is a fight that was made and had a lot of speculation behind it. A lot of folks were kind of played out and tired of it. This is the third time they fought, obviously. The first one ended in a draw. Second one, Moreno became the new champion. And now we're left to the third one because, you know, who else? The flyweight division doesn't have as many contenders as they come to the top of the heads that are going to be good for pay-per-view headliners. So like I said, last year in 2021, there's a lot of amazing moments that happened in the UFC. One of my favorites was whenever Moreno won his flyweight championship title. And yeah, it was a very inspiring moment. Mexico's first ever Mexican-born champion. And now we get another chapter into the story. So the first time that these two guys fought was in late 2020. Both of these guys were coming off of quick turnaround fights because the fights they had prior to facing each other were just quick one-round finishes. Figueiredo was actually doing the quickest turnaround championship fight in UFC history. So getting into the actual fight, as we know, the flyweights are known for having a crazy pace, but this one was just something on another level. Great, amazing exchanges the entire way through, and it seemed like neither one of these guys wanted to give each other an inch of stepping backwards or just having to avoid the fight or stalling. And with action like that, an absolute banger of a fight, it made this one an instant classic. Now, if you had seen how Figueiredo was tearing through opponents before that fight, it just makes the amazing moment of Moreno willing to die inside that cage just even more mind-blowing. Honestly, it was an amazing display from both of them, and Brandon was eating some of Figueiredo's best shots and refusing to back down. Now, breaking down the actual fight itself, after Brandon was taking some of these heavy shots, he stayed disciplined though. He didn't allow himself to get backed into the corner or backed up against the cage where Figueiredo does his best work. Moreno stayed composed and was able to reset himself and stay focused on what he needed to do, at least to survive, and well enough to wait for his shots to come to him. And Moreno not only proved his discipline by circling out whenever he was in those exchanges, whether he was winning them or losing them, but also stayed composed enough to land efficient takedowns and catch Figueiredo off guard. And yeah, I'll say, Figueiredo was surprised that Moreno was willing to put up such a great fight. And even after such a vicious back and forth, it ultimately led to a majority draw. Therefore, Figueiredo was able to retain his title. So the first fight that these two had was a surprise banger, but the sequel to this fight, the second chapter, all focus was on these two guys. And I remember watching and seeing these guys prepare for this fight, and I felt the momentum following with Moreno. Maybe I had a little bias to it. So what? I was super eager to see how these guys were going to deal with this pressure. You know, I could tell that Figueiredo wanted to shut Brandon up. You know, this underdog kid came up out of nowhere and you know, gave him the fight of his life. And now the pressure's on him to demolish him. You know, he had to win in a dominant fashion. Moreno was quick to gain his confidence and to get comfortable inside the cage, and started to gain more and more confidence with every exchange that he was winning. And Figueiredo was trying to keep up with him. At times, it seemed like he was in the driver's seat, but Brandon, again, staying super disciplined, super composed, and was able to weather the storms that Davison was throwing out there. So with that laser focus and presenting problems that Figueiredo wasn't ready for, Brandon was able to finish him in the third round with a rear naked choke and ultimately solidified his place as the flyweight champion. So going into this trilogy match is Moreno's first title defense, and now we have this kind of stigma or aura around the champions that are, you're not the real champion until you defend your title at least once. And this is one of the first trilogies ever to happen where these two opponents fought each other back to back to back without facing anybody else in between. But this time around, this fight I feel like is going to be more than just a physical fight. It's going to be a mental warfare fight. And this isn't one that's going to have to require so much trash talking, but as soon as you get in the cage, you got to know, who's going to want this more. Moreno said in the last fight in chapter 2 that he knew he wasn't fighting the same Figueiredo. He knew that something had changed in him. And yeah, you could tell, because after the fight, Davison didn't immediately call out for a rematch. He wasn't instantly saying, no, let's go get this third trilogy fight done. Figueiredo had been known for finishing opponents fast, usually in the first round, but Moreno in the second fight gave Figueiredo something to think about. How much of his output was he exerting to try to get to this kid? You know, how much is he willing to put out? Is he going to be able to go another 5 rounds deep with him? And I think when Figueiredo was thinking about all that, it limited one of his greatest tools, which is his explosiveness. So going into this third fight for Moreno to be successful, I believe he's going to have to stay sharp with his boxing, striking, kickboxing, all that stuff. I look to see him throwing more kicks to keep Deiveson Figueiredo at a distance and being able to control that distance whenever he feels comfortable to. Another key thing that I think Brandon's going to have to work on is that he's going to have to let the fight come to him and be patient. He can't try to force Deiveson Figueiredo into bad spots, which means he may have to eat some bad shots before he's able to open Deiveson Figueiredo up to land some of his own. Moreno's going to have to make the most of his moments, but I believe he's going to have the chance to if Deiveson Figueiredo comes out in his typical aggressive style. Moreno's also going to have to keep Deiveson Figueiredo guessing, which I think he's had great success doing in the previous 2 matchups. One with his versatile striking, but also with his well-timed takedowns. I think what makes Moreno's ground game so good is that he's not looking just to get a takedown and control. He's looking to get a takedown and advance and get to the next position and make those decisions so that at least he's the one making the decisions, which also leads to some good scrambles out of him as well. And for Deiveson Figueiredo to be successful, I think that he has to get Brandon to respect his power early and start landing clean as soon as the fight starts. If you look at Figueiredo's previous fights, most of his finishes come from whenever his opponents are backing down, drowning under pressure, and putting themselves into bad positions so that Deiveson Figueiredo can pick his shots. Figueiredo is going to have to pick Brandon Moreno apart mentally and keep that pressure on him and not give him any time to gather himself, because once Moreno gets comfortable, it becomes so much harder to get him off his game. Deiveson Figueiredo is used to stalking his opponents and getting them to hesitate, but when Brandon Moreno stayed composed, it took that weapon away from him, and so he's going to have to adjust to that. Basically, in my opinion, Deiveson Figueiredo is kind of like a cannonball. He has a lot of power and a short burst of energy, and it takes him a minute to reload. If Figueiredo is going to win this fight, he's going to have to do things he's not used to, or things that we're probably just not used to seeing him do. And that means fighting at like a Super Saiyan level pace, putting the pressure on, and make sure he's landing. Not just throwing, but landing his shots and landing them in combinations. It's not these one-shot combos that just hope and pray. You know, he fights like a heavyweight, almost similar to Francis Ngannou, ironically. That being said, I see Brandon Moreno winning in more ways than one. I see him willing to go into those deep waters if it comes to it. He's proven to have the gas tank and the ability to do so. Therefore, I see Brandon Moreno winning this one via decision and still remaining the flyweight champion. All right, now going into this main event. Now, there is a lot, and I mean a lot, to talk about in this main event. So much so that I did my homework. I left links for y'all down below. If y'all want to look at them, go for it. If not, I'll try to fill you in as best as I can. But basically, if you haven't heard the story of Francis Ngannou and how he got to where he is today, please go check out the Joe Rogan podcast with him on it. I left a link to it below. And it's amazing. It's a very true, inspiring story. Francis Ngannou, it made me respect him a whole lot more. And adding on to that story is currently what's going on in Francis Ngannou's career is with him and his contract disputes with the UFC. And then another chapter of the story that's been completely overlooked, from what I think, is that Francis Ngannou and Ciryl Gane used to be training partners. They actually trained for a bit. And yeah, you know, there's those training room stories which are kind of like hidden by the unwritten law of the training room of the whatever happens here stays here. So if you rock somebody, knock somebody out, or one guy was getting the best of you or you were getting the best of them, it doesn't leave, right? You don't go brag about that because that's your partner. That's considerably your teammate. You know, you don't want to go bash them. And all that was cool beans up until probably about a week ago where Francis, I believe, said that he'd actually accidentally knocked out Ciryl Gane, and Ciryl Gane's coach came out, who also used to be Francis's coach, said, nah, not true, didn't happen. But basically, it all amounts to is training, and fighting, especially up at this top tier level, is something entirely different. You know, you don't go to training or practice or whatever to go hurt your teammate, right? You don't go in there expecting to leave with a medal, belt, or anything like that, right? It's not that type of hostile environment. At least it shouldn't be. So to sum up what Francis has been going through with the UFC regarding his contract is whether or not he has fights left on his contract or not. Francis Ngannou wants to go box Tyson Fury. That's something entirely different. Obviously, we know the lucrative market that comes with going into boxing, especially for MMA fighters. And there were some other disputes about, you know, how quick they crowned an interim champion after Francis Ngannou was only gone for less than what seems like a year. And yeah, he just feels like he's being overlooked as a champion and as a fighter. So Francis Ngannou is added to the long list of other UFC fighters who have had issues with the UFC company in general. So when we strip away as many of the filters as we can, basically what it comes down to is Francis Ngannou is doubling down on himself, something that he's not a stranger to doing in the past, and he's willing to work and put everything on the line for what he believes he is worth, whether it means more money, whether it means more respect, whether it means being able to make decisions for his own career and his own body. And the UFC has a lot to risk on losing their heavyweight champion if Francis Ngannou wins. You know, that's your heavyweight championship. The person holding that is supposed to be the baddest of the bad dudes that you have on your roster. That's supposed to be like your Stone Cold Steve Austin, if you have to relate it back to the 90s. The heavyweight champion of the UFC has often been known as the baddest man on the planet. And Francis Ngannou looks like the baddest man on the planet. He melts people's faces off with one shot. But I digress. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, Ciryl Gane, if you look at the way he fights, he is an undefeated kickboxer, undefeated in the UFC as well. He just finished Derek Lewis via TKO, and Derek Lewis is probably as close as to Francis Ngannou when it comes to punching power as you're going to get. Both of those guys are very scary knockout artists. It only takes one shot from them to put you right out. We've seen it happen against multiple times, multiple opponents. Amazing how quickly they can change an entire fight and honestly change somebody's entire life with having to suffer one of those damaging blows. So when it comes to Ciryl Gane, he is a breath of fresh air when it comes to this heavyweight division, which has somewhat struggled into finding contenders here in recent years. Stipe was on top of the throne for a minute. DC was there for a second too. And now you have Francis Ngannou, who's always been a heavy hitter. Tai Tuivasa is in there too, and Derek Lewis. These are the main players that you have in the heavyweight division. Ciryl Gane is also different in this heavyweight division by the way that he goes about these fights. You know, his style is a little bit more springier than we're used to seeing in this division. He's very light on his feet. He was a kickboxer before, so he has that stance where he's moving back and forth, very great at shifting his weight and excellent head movement. His combinations are very crisp, very clean, and although his shots all have power behind them, he just comes in at waves against his opponents. And he knows just exactly when to mix it up with an unorthodox strike to catch one of his opponents off guard. As far as from what I can tell, Ciryl Gane has no issues when it comes to conditioning, going into those 5-round decisions if he has to, against experienced guys who can put your lights out if they need to. And so that's a very risky game to play in this division, but Ciryl Gane seems to make it a benefit for him. Although he may not be as powerful as Francis Ngannou, I do think that Ciryl Gane is more patient and also a lot more precise. And he knows exactly how to exert the perfect amount of energy to get his combinations to land, to get out of harm's way, to reset and get his opponents to chase him, which I believe in the heavyweight division is something so hard to do because this dude literally never stops moving. He's moving to the left, to the right, back, forth, in front of you. Now you're getting punched in the face and knee to the chin, and it's going to be a long night. And we got to see the overwhelming pace and precision and accuracy of these strikes overwhelm Derek Lewis in the last time that we saw Ciryl Gane out. And yeah, Derek Lewis wasn't exactly getting hurt terribly bad by any one particular shot, but it was the multitude of shots that were landing. And Derek Lewis just didn't have anything to answer for it. He didn't have anything to fire back at him. Gane ultimately knew, if I have to run away from you to get into a safe position and reset, then I will. If I have to take time to gain my distance back and, you know, get another feel or another read on what you're doing, he will. And so I think that's a very smart IQ play, a big fight IQ thing that Gane's willing to do. He also has a lot of submissions under his belt, you know, so he's no stranger. He's not just one-dimensional as much as he seems like it by the way that he moves and the way that he fights. He's willing to go to the ground if he has to. He may not be top tier, top of the line guy on the ground who wants to keep the fight there, but he's known enough to hold his own. The only criticisms with Gane is that people think he is a boring fighter, which at times I could see that because it does take him a while to get started. You know, he is a slow starter. It takes him a while to get his distance down. And when I say a while, I mean just literally a minute for him to get his distance down until he's comfortable figuring out what range he wants to land his shots at. So yeah, although there are times that Gane doesn't give us those highlight one-shot knockout finishes that we're used to seeing in the heavyweight division, I think that there's a respect to be given to him for being able to be so precise with the art of striking somebody down until they literally can't use their leg anymore or literally are tired of defending and have no answers for you. I think that's a very impressive thing to do. And although Gane is crisp, clean, and has all the moves to go with it, he also has the mental battle of seeing somebody he's trained with across the cage from him. You know, depending on how he handles that, could have a big impact on the fight. And on the counter side of that, Francis Ngannou, I mean, this dude is literally built different. He is very intimidating, not only from his stature, but also his knockout power that we are no stranger to seeing. If this dude were to sneeze, I'd say, excuse me. I wouldn't be surprised if the boogeyman checks underneath his bed for this guy. Definite threat. The only blemishes that come to mind whenever I think of Francis Ngannou are the first time that he fought Stipe. You know, Francis Ngannou fell in love with his hands too much. wasn't ready for the clinic of takedowns and wrestling and pressure that Stipe was going to put on him. And when Ngannou was able to fight Stipe again, he viciously knocked him out to become the heavyweight champion. The only other blemish I could think that Ngannou has on his record was his loss to Derrick Lewis. And that was an infamous match that went down as something that was supposed to be absolute fireworks, but ended up being both of these guys hesitant to throw a punch. But I think that Ngannou has moved past that, has moved past those nerves. Obviously, he's ready to go in there and put on a show. Against Stipe, he seemed like he was able to see a different side of Ngannou, or was presenting a different style, if you will. His patience was on another level. He didn't get too threatened by the takedowns that Stipe was throwing at him. And at that point, you could tell that Francis Ngannou had definitely improved, even if it was in small things, whether it was stuffing a takedown, making sure he kept himself in a good space, also mixing in strikes. You know, he was throwing 1-2 combinations followed by a leg kick. It may seem like a very small change, but it was very impactful on the way that Stipe was trying to attack him. And as DC said, technical, patient, stalking Francis Ngannou is a very scary force, but also full rage Hulk mode Francis Ngannou is also a very scary force, as we've seen in his other matches as well. Now, the only thing that I see maybe a problem for Ngannou against his matchup with Gane is that he is going to have to be patient, even if he has Gane hurt, or even if he feels like pouring on the punches. There was a point in his last fight with Stipe where he had Stipe hurt. He did rock him, and Stipe threw a punch right back at him, and there was a moment that seemed like I had never thought I would see it, but Francis Ngannou actually stumbled back. Maybe he just took a misstep, but to me it looked like, oh man, that one fucking landed. So going into this one, like I said, the aura of you're not the champion until you defend your belt is following Francis Ngannou just the same. So in this one, I look to see Francis to be much more patient, much more willing to pick his shots more wisely. And I think that we're going to be able to see Gane be able to keep Francis at bay, keep him at a distance. Like I said, it does take Gane a little bit longer to settle into a fight. If I'm Ciryl Gane, the longer this fight goes out, the better. If I can get Francis going into the 4th and 5th round and testing his conditioning, all good things for Ciryl Gane. The only problem with the game plan of taking Francis Ngannou into deep water is that it's kind of like playing Tom Brady. Ciryl Gane has to be perfect every single second of that fight. Francis Ngannou has to be perfect for one moment. And that is a very crucial moment if he lands that one shot. All it takes is one. So if I was Ciryl Gane, I would take out Francis's legs. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean just by kicking them. That means kicking him, also moving around in space, getting out in range so that Francis Ngannou has to come to you. Striking a lot early, making sure that you can win those early rounds if you get out of those, and making Francis fall behind on the cards. It may be a long, drawn-out fight, but hey, at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it if you become champion. And from Ngannou's point of view, I mean, you have to put the pressure on Gane and get him uncomfortable, get him moving in ways that he doesn't want to move, put him in positions that he's not ready for, whether that means smothering him and try to corral him into one certain part of the cage, or making him fight off with his back foot. Something that he may be comfortable doing, but is definitely hard to do the entire fight, especially when you have a wrecking ball like Ngannou coming at you. So with that being said, and everything taken into account, I believe Francis Ngannou has a lot more to fight for and is taking a big risk on himself and is willing to double down on himself. He's fighting for much more than just a championship belt. He's fighting for not only the rights to his own body and his own career, but his legacy. You know, what the future holds for him is unknown if he loses. And honestly, what the future holds for him is unknown if he does win. He is trying to get both hands on the steering wheel, and I believe that motivation and honestly maybe even desperation is going to motivate him to be able to go get this finish and finish Ciryl Gane in the second round via TKO and still remain the heavyweight champion of the world and the baddest man on the planet. So guys, that's all I got for y'all today. Let me know who you got picked. Let me know what you're excited to see on Saturday night. There's also a great lineup of fights happening before these two, main event and co-main event. So if you want to do your research like I did, I left the Joe Rogan podcast with Francis Ngannou link down below, as well as the MMA on Point video that talks about Francis Ngannou and his disputes with the UFC. And if you haven't yet, be sure to follow the Combat Contact Twitter page, where we'll be doing a lot more giveaways as well as here on the channel. I'm really excited to go into this new year with y'all. Thank y'all for tuning in. As always, guys, stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.